Hello, and welcome to another episode of Possibility to Profit. This is day 3 of the webinar, and I'm very excited about today because it actually touches on what I think is one of the most crucial pieces about how we move any possibility into a place where we can actually profit from it. And it's predicated on something very special here. And I want to just very briefly touch on this point. Everything is a relationship. Everything that we encounter has a relational quality to it, a relational component to it. And the lifeblood of any relationship is communication. And that word, communication, gets to be very misunderstood in my experience. And not a lot of people are masterful at the process. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be spending a little bit of time today just taking a look at the nature of communication in some very specific ways. And the intent here, once again, is to move possibility into a reality in a way that we can profit from it. How do we move possibility into reality so that we can profit? That's what we're going to be looking at. And when we're exploring this, day 3 is the idea here that we're going to be entertaining. Who you are speaks so loudly, I can't hear a word you're saying. And I just love that phraseology. Who you are speaks so loudly that I can't hear a word you're saying. Learning how to master the art of communication is absolutely crucial to your effectiveness as a communicator. Now, that being said, I want to begin today's session a little different. I'm going to start with a little movie clip. And this particular movie clip is it's taken from the movie Gandhi, Richard Attenborough's movie Gandhi, and it is the funeral sequence. Gandhi has been assassinated, and there's a little piece at the end of this that speaks volumes about what I'm going to be referencing here as a superpower. So without further ado, let me back out of the picture and we will introduce the movie.
The object of this massive tribute died as he had always lived, a private man without wealth, without property, without official title or office. Mahatma Gandhi was not the commander of armies nor a ruler of vast lands. He could not boast any scientific achievement or artistic gift. Yet men, governments, dignitaries from all over the world have joined hands today to pay homage to this little brown man in the loincloth who led his country to freedom. In the words of General George C. Marshall, the American Secretary of State, Mahatma Gandhi has become the spokesman for the conscience of all mankind. He was a man who made humility and simple truth more powerful than empires. And Albert Einstein added, generations to come will scarce believe that such a one as this, ever in flesh and blood, walked upon this earth.
I absolutely love that clip. It speaks volumes about who this person was that we called Mahatma Gandhi. Now, as they mentioned in the movie, didn't have a title, didn't have position, didn't have a job, had no money of his own, yet he actually freed a nation. He was the father of some of a movement that informed the civil rights movement in the United States. Yeah, an incredibly powerful man that moved possibility into reality through communication. And not communication in the way that many people think about it. Communication, he had mastered the process of communicating. He had mastered the ability to actually cause movement in a way that didn't produce significant unintended consequences. And that's what we're looking at here. When we're looking at communication mastery, and this is what today's topic is going to be about, is how do you master this so that you can actually leverage this thing as a true superpower? That's what I'm interested in doing here. It has to do with your ability to do anything. Your ability to communicate effectively is absolutely crucial to your ability to produce results in your life. And it's absolutely the key to moving possibility into reality in a profitable way. If you've got to go back and clean up after yourself, that's a pretty costly endeavor. So we want to be able to address this in a way that speaks to what we can make possible. And I want to actually talk about this from an organizational perspective. So I'm going to pull myself out of the way here just a little bit. And I came across a couple of studies not too long ago, and I use this in the leadership development work that I do just to kind of frame the conversation about why leaders may want to pay attention to some very specific things. This particular factual information piece comes from a study that was done by the McKinsey organization, the McKinsey Consulting Organization. And they polled leaders worldwide, and they were interested in just how effective do these leaders actually think that they are. And 86% of leaders around the world rated themselves as inspiring and good role models. This is good stuff. Now, this is a self-assessment, but you got to be pretty impressed by what they think of themselves. Now, counter this, and I'm going to counter this a little bit. Gallup, in the same year that this poll was done, and this was done in 2016, the same year, Gallup organization surveyed employees around the world also, and asked about the leaders that these people were actually working with. And here's what that data set suggested. 82% of employees around the world see their leaders as fundamentally uninspiring. There's a little bit of a gap here. A little bit of a gap. And we're going to be looking at this from the standpoint of communication, and specifically, what's the consequence of not communicating effectively? And inspiration is part of this. The same Gallup survey says that 87% of the global workforce is disengaged from what they do in a significant way. Only 13% are passionately involved in what they're doing. 87%. Now, the cost is huge in this environment when you start taking a look at these numbers. As a matter of fact, this gap, this 87% disengagement gap, organizations around the world spend approximately $42 billion a year on leadership development activities with the intent of moving that disengagement score off of that 87%. And that number has stuck right around 87, 84, 83% for the last 20 years that I'm familiar with that Gallup has been conducting these polls. There's not any movement occurring, even though we're spending $42 billion a year. We're spending it on the wrong thing. Very simply, we're spending it on the wrong thing. We're not working where it matters. And that's what I want to work with today. And this is the information that I want to provide for you. Traditional leadership programs miss the boat because they don't focus on the core that really needs to be addressed. And that's what we're going to be looking at here. So I want to just start with something that I've taken from a program that I run with the American Association of Physician Leaders. And it's a program on leadership authenticity. And the model that I'm working with here has to do with the nature of story. And I'm not talking about a story that you pick up and read in a novel. I'm talking about the story of who you are. The story that people have made up in their mind, the story that you've made up in your mind about who you are. Now, what's interesting is that story gets in the room before you do. And people are interacting with the story, not with you. And if you are encumbered by your story, the authentic self isn't allowed to actually interact with other people as well. Your story buffers. And this notion of story gets to be very interesting because in many organizations and for many people in life, the story that is told about who they are, what's important to them, they didn't have control over necessarily. It just sort of developed. It was developed in your family system. If you've got more than one sibling, there's a story about dominance. There's a story about who's the favorite. There's a story about all kinds of things that carries forward in life. And this story begins to contribute to the development of what I'm calling a mindset. This sense of identity. For some people, this is so reified that you'll hear them say, well, that's just the way I am. And it's not just the way I am. It's the way that I have decided to, believe myself to be. It's part of my story. Now, the idea of story basically has three components to it. It has a philosophy. It's a way of understanding the world. Kind of how do I make sense of the world? What's the philosophical basis for how life is supposed to be lived? That informs part of the story, and a lot of this comes out of family of origin. There's a psychology, and associated with the physiology is a psychology. This is how I'm supposed to behave. This is, the cause-effect scenario comes into play around the psychology. And then the other piece that feeds into this is physiology. And the physiology is how I actually comport myself in the world. Now, you bundle these together and you've got a communication package. You've got a philosophical basis that informs a psychological entertaining or the psychological movement that an individual works with, and that movement shows up in the physiology in some very specific ways. I was working with a guy, the names and faces will be changed to protect the innocent here, but very large global international company. He was a very senior executive vice president, and his physiology was very interesting. This fellow was about 6'2". But he looked, if you were around him, you would assume he was only about 5'8". He was stoop-shouldered, and he didn't have organic reasons for having his physiology be this way. But he was bent over, he slouched. When he sat at a conference table, he would slide under the table just about. And the consequence of this was, from a story perspective, people didn't see him as a player. Now, he was a senior executive in this organization. He was sharp as a tack, one of the most intelligent people I've ever worked with. But he wasn't seen as a player. And a lot of it had to do with the way that the story of him had gotten developed, in large part based on how he was showing up physiologically. The gateway to shifting any story is through one of these three doorways: philosophy, psychology, or physiology. And I found physiology to be actually a fairly easy one to work with. When I was working with him, we literally had him on a massage table. We had him do some body work. Because again, there was nothing organically in place here. He had some family of origin stuff about being a visible target in his family of origin, so he shrunk himself down in size. And it showed up in part of the philosophy: don't be a target. Part of his psychology was hedge my bets. So there was all of these things bundled together here. The net of it was he communicated something through his story that wasn't serving him. What he wanted to be and how he wanted to be seen was as a player in this organization, somebody that was significant. Well, I ended up working with he and his team for about 5 years. And when we finished working together, he went on to do some different things within that organization. And he was actually quite successful. He ended up being on boards of subsidiary companies that the organization had internationally. He was actually seen as a very significant player in the organization, but it took some work. He had to actually begin to practice things differently, and that's one of the things that I had him do. Physiologically, I had him actually practice taking larger steps. Now, it was uncomfortable for me. He literally said, "This doesn't feel comfortable." And it wasn't. He said, "This feels awkward." And it was. Had him sitting up straight in his chair, and he started complaining about, "God, this hurts. This doesn't." Comfort. Most people would rather be comfortable. Most people would rather be comfortable than be effective. And that's a big noticing. Notice what you notice here. In him and with him, he wanted to be different. This future state lived out there for him, and he was willing to change his vibrational frequency through a shift in physiology. And accompanying that, he started to shift philosophically as well as psychologically. So this story is a big deal. Every one of us has a story. And part of my question here has to do, does your story run you, or are you in charge of your story? You can wear a story like a suit of clothes, or the story will wear you. And this is where authenticity starts to come into play. We're always going to have a story built up around us. You don't want to have it be the dominant portion of who is showing up in the room. People need to find out who's behind that facade. And this is where authenticity in leadership comes into play, and this is where authenticity in life begins to make a very big difference. So take this story idea and just kind of think about it a little bit in terms of what you're trying to do. Authenticity. Again, I teach a program, like I mentioned, at the American Association for Physician Leadership that is organized around working with people that have credentials up the wazoo. They've got doctorates, they've got, in some cases, got 3 and 4 specialties that they've been degreed in. These are very bright people, and you walk into their offices, they've got the shingle, the diplomas all up on their walls and all kinds of stuff. So they tend to look at themselves, and others in their organizations tend to look at themselves through the prism of the paper on the wall, the story that it represents. So getting through that can be very difficult sometimes. Your occupation begins to inform your story about who you are. You want to be very mindful of just kind of what's in charge here. Now, authenticity, it comes from the Greek word authentikos, which means principle or genuine. That core, that genuine piece. You take that a little bit further here. There's another way of defining this. And it's an emotionally appropriate, significant, and purposive way of interacting. Appropriate, significant, purposive, and responsible way of interacting. Now, that's a mouthful. And when I was early on working with these physicians and administrators in this program, I was always getting questions about confusion around authenticity. Really, what is it? And this is where I started looking at some definitions. Kierkegaard had one. I went to philosophers. Carl Jung had his version of it. I came across this one, and when I started paring everything down, what I came up with was this. Authenticity is very simple. It's what remains when I'm finished trying to manage your perception of me. When I'm finished trying to manage your perception of me and just let it be what it is, then you get who I am. I'm not concerned about what you think of me. What you think of me is none of my business. It really isn't. You're gonna have whatever thoughts you have. I need to be able to connect with myself in a way that I can now bring who I am into the game. And that's where the secret is. That's where the superpower actually begins to be developed. It's when I'm positioning myself in that way so that I can do that effectively. My organization will thrive. I will begin to do things that will align other people. And in terms of co-creating coordinated movement, we're off to the races. Things actually begin to work fairly well. Why authenticity? Why this focus on it? Well, there's a couple of reasons, and I'm going to put this in categories both personal as well as organizational. Personally, when you do this, it builds resilience. And I mean this in a very specific way. It builds resilience. You're able to withstand the vicissitudes of life. I mean, life will throw all kinds of stuff at us. And if you've got a good, strong sense of who I am, you keep bouncing back. If you're tied up to your image, if you're tied up to the facade, if you're tied up to the story of who you're supposed to be, then you have difficulty. It builds resilience. Now, there's an interesting story, and this is timely, I think. Simone Biles, the gymnast, pulled herself out of the Olympic team competition this week. And her reason for doing it was very authentic. And in the news conference that she held, she talked about the distress that she was experiencing mentally. She physically was fine, but she said, I'm not at the top of my game. Yeah, there is so much pressure right now. I can't perform in the way that I know I need to perform if I'm going to be successful as a team member and as an individual gymnast. My inability to perform at that level is going to compromise the team. That vulnerability, that willingness to just say, yeah, I'm sorry guys, but I've got to take care of myself here so that I can be whole, so that I can be available. There's resilience that comes through authenticity. And we connect through vulnerability here. Vulnerability and authenticity go hand in hand in many ways here. You get access, greater access to intuition. When you're not wrestling with this facade and trying to keep that in place, the spirit actually has a chance to bring its voice out. You can actually hear something else resonating. And and that can be your intuition. And I'm going to be very specific here. You're not feeling the way you think, and you're not thinking the way you feel. You quiet all of that, and you begin to hear something else. You begin to experience something else, and intuition begins to be partially present here. Partly that's because there is less conflict in the brain, the frontal lobes of the brain, literally, and the MRIs will authenticate this. When we're actually being authentic, the frontal lobes of the brain, which is the executive center of the brain, they become synchronized, and you are less prone to errors. Because you're not conflicted. Now, this is very important. Higher cognitive functions. You actually present as being more intelligent. You really have access to greater thinking capacity when you're being authentic. Again, because you're not being pulled in so many different directions, trying to maintain a facade. Energy will follow attention. And if your attention is on the story and maintaining the validity of the story, you're not paying attention to who you are. And if you're not paying attention to who you are, it's going to be very difficult to bring a possibility into reality that you really desire in a way that's going to be profitable. Now, in an organizational sense, there are a lot of benefits here. It builds coordination. So if you're looking at co-creating coordinated movement, you're going to build coordination when you're authentic. People will say, got it, I'm with you. You're going to build coordination. So co-creating coordinated movement, authenticity is absolutely key to this. And when I'm talking about authenticity, I'm not talking about throwing the kimono open and just sharing everything. I'm talking about how do you communicate about what's important? How do you communicate about what's important? You have to be authentic in that. It builds trust. And if everything is about a relationship, communication is the lifeblood of a healthy relationship. Trust is the foundation of it. Without trust, the house of cards will come down. And authenticity will help sustain trust. You don't have to have all of the answers all of the time. And if you're authentic about that, you actually will begin building trust in a very significant way with the people that you're working with. Reduces blame, and this is concomitant with building trust. When people are trusting each other, blame seems to disappear as a fallback for what is going on. If something goes sideways, we cop to it. We just acknowledge it. Yeah, mea culpa. Let's see what we need to do next. Moving possibility into reality is not an art of perfection. The handout that you got yesterday, in yesterday's email that you downloaded, perfection versus excellence. You want to be focusing on excellence, not on perfection. Okay, where did I go sideways here? Okay, reduces blame, increases profitability. Okay, I can go back one slide here, but I think you got the message that you can actually increase profitability as a consequence of this. Cycle times reduce, and all there's all kinds of reasons for this. So enough on this. Authenticity is what we're after, and I'm talking about authenticity here as an analog to, or as a differentiator from, the story. I'm always going to have the story, but I don't want it to be in front of me. The stories are useful. I can use the story to actually help move myself through this world that I work in. There's a story about me as a consultant. There's a story about me as a coach, and they're useful. They're useful, but they aren't who I am. They aren't who I am. They're a vehicle by which I actually make a difference in the world, and it's the me that makes the difference in the world. That's what I want to pay attention to. So we're looking at authenticity from the lens of developing mastery of communication. That's what we're looking to do here. And as you look at all of this, one of the things that becomes very, very specifically obvious is that communication with human beings, communication with other people, is not a logical process. I mean, it really isn't. You can develop the spreadsheets, you can develop the business case until the cows come home, and if people don't buy in, you haven't communicated. Human beings are illogical creatures. They, remember yesterday's material, we looked at the nature of how the mind works. I think the way I feel, and then I begin to feel the way I think. If I'm not addressing that feeling structure, how I describe something determines how I feel about it. How I feel about it, literally dictates what behavior I'm going to show up with. So when we're looking at getting people to co-create with us, and we're looking at them to coordinate with us, I'm not going to be focused on behavior. What I'm going to be focused on is the description process that they're using to inform their feeling state. Change the description, you'll change the feeling structure. Change the feeling structure, you will change the behavior. But if you start out trying to change the behavior, people get defensive. They'll back up. And communication with human beings isn't logical. It's a biological process. Make no mistake about it. It's a biological process. And when we're looking at it from that lens, there's a lot that you can actually do to understand how to master the process of communication. Now, I'm going to back myself down here a little bit because I want to emphasize something in just a moment. And let me disappear here. Let's bring this up. Communication is biological. And I want to define this term. Communication, it's the ways, plural, the ways that we work out common meaning with one another. Now, I want you to just stop and think about that for a moment. The ways that we use to work out common meaning with one another. How did you learn to do that? How did you learn to communicate? Well, if you're like most of us, it was an accidental process. I mean, it truly was. It was an accidental process. You're going along, living your life, you're a newborn baby, and you're kind of paying attention to things, and you're starting to form some pattern recognition skills, and your brain starts wiring together, and you notice when you make a certain sound, mom kind of does this, or when you make another sound, mom kind of does that, and you start going, wonder what's going on here. So you deliberately will make a sound and go, oh, yeah, that did work. And one day you make another sound and it sounds like mama. And all of a sudden, mom is smiling from ear to ear. She's reaching down, picking you up and going, oh my God, it talks. And there's a reinforcement process that comes into play here. It's a trial and error. Kids experiment. Kids practice. Kids aren't attached to words in the way that adults are. Kids they don't know what they mean. So they're experimenting with it. They play with them. They absolutely drive adults crazy because they don't know what we think we know about these words. That's a bad word. That's a good word. You can't say that. Well, why can't I say that? Yeah. I was at a barbecue dinner with my sister years and years ago when one of my nieces, I think they were about 3 years of age, and they're both adults now. They've got kids of their own. But I remember the youngest of the two girls came from the front yard into the backyard where we were having our barbecue, and she asked her mother if crap, well, the euphemism for crap was a dirty word. And my sister said, yeah, that's one of the words you can't say. At the top of her lungs, she yelled over the roof to her sister on the other side of the house, going, you can't say, yeah, crap, yeah, okay. And so they had no idea what it was. They were making the meaning up. And they didn't know what the meaning was, so they were checking it out. The ways that we work out common meaning. Now, we use words primarily. And most of us learn language. But study after study after study shows that language, the actual words that we use, are only a very small part. And some studies suggest it's only 7%, perhaps, of the total communication package that gets delivered, which means that there's about 93% in a whole other series of domains: body language, energy, just all kinds of things that come into play here. When you're looking at mastering the process of communication, you're looking to work out common meaning with other people. I work in cultures all over the world. Literally the only continent that I haven't worked in and worked on is Antarctica. I've been everywhere else. I've worked with folks in jungles literally in jungles in Central America. I've worked in Africa. I've worked in Geneva, Beijing. You name the place, I've probably been there, and I've worked with teams. I've worked with individuals. Working out common meaning. If I relied only on my language skills, I would be dead in the water. I really would. I wouldn't be effective. Moving possibility into probability in a profitable fashion requires understanding the nature of communication. Communication is the ways that we work out common meaning. And a reliance on your words aren't going to get you there. Not in any way, shape, or form. Now, I want to show you something here. I'm going to back myself down out of this picture, and I'm going to put this picture up. This is a bow wake. Whoop, there we go. Let's try that again. Boat moving through the water. This boat, and every boat actually, generates a bow wake when it's moving through the water. There's not a boat that you will put in the water that will not in some way, shape, or form have a bow wake in front of it. That's just part of the nature of the beast. Now, here's what's interesting about a bow wake. It's a measure. The size of the bow wake is a measure of how much resistance is being generated as the boat moves through the water. The larger the bow wake, the more resistance there actually is. The more disruption, if you go behind, the more disruption you'll see in the body of water behind it. So every one of us, and this is part of your story, every one of us has a bow wake. Every single one of us, as we move through our environments, our story gets in front of us. The story is your bow wake. It moves in front of us. There's also all kinds of other elements that come into play here. Your energetic body, how you actually put it out there. The tonality of your voice when you speak. How you physiologically move. Is it fast? Is it hectic? Is it frantic? Is it measured? All of these things contribute to your bow wake. Now, where this gets to be significantly important is when you start thinking about it in the context of leadership presence. Your presence. Leaders cause movement. Leaders cause movement. That's what we're always doing. We're continuously in the process of moving things forward, moving things around. And the idea of causing movement is one of the things that you want to pay attention to as a leader. Before you open your mouth, what kind of movement have you caused? What kind of movement have you caused? And that's a key question to be asking yourself if you're looking to have something happen. You're not going to do anything by yourself. You're not going to create results by yourself. Any result that you will ever produce will require at least one other person working with you to make that happen. It truly will. And when you're looking at this, in terms of presence, your bow wake makes a big difference. It is a huge difference. Is it too small? How much resistance are you creating unwittingly? how much resistance is actually going into that movement. I was doing some work in a hospital system a number of years ago, and again, one of the senior executives, I was coaching the CEO and a couple of members of his executive team. And one of the members of the team had been there for a number of years. Actually, he'd been there for about 25 years, actually. And the story that people told about him, you would have thought he was the devil incarnate, in many ways. He was insufferable. He was a curmudgeon. He was a taskmaster. He took no prisoners. I mean, there was all kinds of things that were said about him, and he was extraordinarily good at his job. The story caused a lot of friction. It caused a lot of resistance to change, because what we were doing is we were working with this system, with this organization. We were shifting out, and the CEO was actually shifting out some key members of his executive team and replacing them with some other people because they were moving in a different direction. This person was not going anywhere. That had been decided that he was too valuable in so many ways, had institutional knowledge, all kinds of stuff going on, and his bow wake was enormous. It was very disruptive. So that was one of the things that I actually ended up working with him and with the team on, was how do we mitigate the consequence of that bow wake. And he actually ended up being a big teddy bear. And there was just a lot of stuff that was going on with this. But you want to pay attention to this bow wake. And what was interesting, at least early on in my conversations with he and his subordinates and some of the senior executives, they would just say, well, that's just the way he is. No, it isn't just the way he is. That's the way he's practiced being over 25 years. And because he practiced being it doesn't mean that he can't change it. And getting the team on board with that was a big deal, because they were invested, literally, they were invested in reinforcing that story. Well, you don't understand. That's just what he's not, you know how he is. They wouldn't let go of that story for the longest time. And I spent about 4 years working with these guys, and they eventually let go of that story. And he was quite successful. He went on to head up as CEO of a sister organization that they spun off. How noticed are you? How noticed are you? That's another question of the bow wake. If you're too timid, if you're moving too slowly, if you're moving too passively, you're not going to get the kind of buy-in that you need. Your story makes a difference, folks. It makes a big difference. And you want to be in front of it. You want to calibrate. What's the environment causing or calling for? Not causing. What's the environment calling for at this point in time? How do I need to show up? Authenticity is about vulnerability. And if I'm being vulnerable, I can actually begin to develop a whole set of tools that allow me to be effective in a lot of different environments. When I first went to Japan, I lived in Japan for about 5.5 years, ran eventually one of the largest human resource consulting companies in Asia. And when I first landed there, I did not know a single word of Japanese. I was a head taller than everybody around me. I was not familiar with the culture in any way, shape, or form. It was kind of like, and this, it was kind of like, wow, what have I dropped myself into? And I needed to find a way to not let myself get overwhelmed. So I was I honestly and literally was very open and vulnerable about how confused it was, how confused I was. I typically don't ask for a lot of help around some things. That kind of comes out of my family of origin. I was firstborn, and self-reliance was what we did on the farm, and all that stuff. So I had to learn how to ask for help, to set up a banking account, for goodness sakes. My executive assistant, yes, I had to have her go with me to the bank to set up a bank account so that I could actually transact business. And being willing to be actually vulnerable enough to have fun with that. Authenticity is what's left when I stop trying to impress you, when I stop trying to manage your perceptions of me. And when I'm doing that well, I'm communicating. I am actually communicating in a very grounded, powerful manner. My bow wake is in play. And all of this stuff starts to actually organize itself. Now, one of the other things that you can consider, and this is one of the things that I actually invite people a lot to do and to pay attention to, is to ask themselves the question, how do other people feel about themselves when they're in my presence? And if you ask yourself that question, how do people feel about themselves when they're around me? Do they feel threatened? Do they feel safe? Do they feel inspired? I mean, just simply asking yourself that question makes a huge difference in terms of how you can, if you're noticing, notice what you're noticing. You can begin to shift, you can begin to adjust, you can begin to do things differently, even to the point where you actually may begin saying things differently and saying different things than you perhaps would have. And if you can begin to think about this up front, how do I want people to feel about themselves when they're around me before I open my mouth, before I walk in the room? I'm communicating all of the time, and I don't want to be accidental about it. I want to be, it's a superpower. If you can master this, it is truly a superpower. You want to be able to lock this in and have it be part of your repertoire, part of your way of actually interacting in the world. You can't afford to be accidental with some of the stakes that you have in play. Bringing that possibility into a reality, you have to do things differently than you've ever done before because you've never been there before. So what's going to be required? This is what you want to pay attention to. These are the things that we're actually wrestling with and working with. The biggest stumbling block, and I go back to the McKinsey study that the very first slide I showed you, 87% thought that they were inspiring, that they were good leaders. What you think is true about yourself is usually irrelevant, and it's often erroneous. Truly. Now that's humbling, but it's the gateway to doing something different, and it's the gateway to beginning to learn something different. You want to be in a position of saying, I'm not sure. Let's see where we can take this. Communication is the lingua franca, if you will, of leadership. You cannot lead effectively unless you know how to communicate effectively. The activity of co-creating coordinated movement in a way that causes the actions necessary to produce the results that you say that you want. That's what you're after. That is exactly what you're after. And you can't afford to be, again, accidental about it. This is where your focus actually can pay some huge dividends. You start noticing how you're communicating. How do people feel about themselves in my presence? How do I want them to feel about themselves in my presence? Those are key questions to be interested in. Energy will follow attention. So focus your attention on where it can make a difference. Effective leadership, co-creating coordinated movement starts with you. Insist that you, and I showed you this yesterday, insist that you and everyone around you behaves, thinks, feels, and speaks as if the future were already here. And if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to actually act that way, things begin to change in some very interesting way. Now, I'm going to repeat myself. And I'm going to repeat myself in a very specific way. I'm going to bring back a model that you've seen me share with you already. And I'm going to do this for a very specific reason because you haven't seen this model in this way. And I'm going to move this to here. And I'm going to drop me to there. Communication. Now, remember, you're looking at authenticity. What gets you in trouble and what will trip you up is your mindset. This is just the way I am. This is the beliefs I have, or these are the beliefs I have. This is what I want to hold on to. My mindset, it's reified, it's structured. I'm feeling the way that I'm thinking, and I'm thinking the way that I'm feeling. All of that's going on. Here's how this can look. Remember, we're working in a frequency field. Everything is possible. Everything is already here. It just hasn't been manifested. It's already happened. I just haven't arrived. That's one way to think about this. You keep that in mind. It's already here. I just haven't arrived. Now, as we look at this frequency field, and again, we've seen this, you've got a timeline that works here. There's a past, there's a future, and there's this now that lives right in the middle of this frequency field. This now is a mindset. It is a mindset. Everything that I experience in my life is a consequence of that mindset. 95%, this goes back to the very first day, 95% of my behavior is out of my awareness, my conscious awareness. And it's the behaviors that I engage in that produce the results that I have. It's the mindset that I have that allows me to notice the things that I notice that are on that frequency band. So when you're looking to communicate differently, one of the things that you're looking to do is shift your mindset. If you cannot move your mindset, you're going to continue to communicate in the way that you already and always have. And as a consequence of that, you're going to continue to have exactly what you've always had. The future is out here. And that future possibility, and I use the word future because it's a placeholder, it's what we're familiar with. That desired state lives at a different frequency structure. I move my mindset into that frequency structure, which includes how I communicate. I move that into a different phase, and that possibility now becomes visibly, tangibly present in my experience. This is what we're working with. This is how this all comes together. And what you want to be able to do is put yourself in a position where you're continuously examining your mindset and beginning to tweak it, beginning to tune it in a way that allows you to be far more effective, far quicker in what you're doing, and far more available, both to others but also to the opportunities that are present in this frequency field. Life is moving to and through me all of the time. There is so much coming to and through. What is it that I have access to? I'm not going to notice what isn't vibrating in accordance with and in resonance with my mindset. I need to be able to shift in order to experience something different. That's what we're looking at. So I'm going to close off right now. I want to introduce Doland again, and for a very specific reason. I want to do it this way. You're actually going to get to see his face today. The last two interviews, he's been the voice behind the camera. And he's going to be interviewing a very dear friend of mine. Actually, somebody that's a little bit more than a very dear friend. It's a fellow that is actually married to my daughter. So he's my son-in-law. And I want to just, let me bring this up here. Let's see, where did we go? Up next, Mr. Doland White. There we are. Okay. So Todd Wilday is whom he is going to interview. And Todd is a quality assurance manager at the state of Washington. He was a participant in the mastermind program. And he's going to talk a little bit about what went on here. Because what we did in that mastermind program for a year was work on mindset. That's all we worked on for a year was mindset. So I'm going to turn it over to Doland. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about tomorrow, which is around commitment and the nature of commitment. You're not going to get what you want by being committed to it. I'll guarantee that. You're not going to get it. There's a different way to approach commitment. And I'm going to begin to set that up so that you are ready to actually engage the stuff that we're going to be working with tomorrow. So between now and then, I want to just invite you to sit back and take a few minutes here. This isn't a long interview. None of these are. This is only about a 10-minute interview at the most. I think it's 8 minutes actually. And this is Doland White interviewing Todd Wilday.
Hey, thanks, Blaine, for passing the ball. I appreciate it. I'm blessed today to spend a few minutes with Todd Wilday, and we're going to just chat a little bit about the mastermind. But before we get started, Todd, for the people that haven't met you yet, or may not know you, would you mind just take a moment, just introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Dolan. Todd Wilday. I've been living here in Washington for about 20 years. I've been married for about 20 years, 18 years. I have two boys, 16 and a 12-year-old. I have been working for the state of Washington in social services as a quality assurance manager for pretty much 20 years. So, yeah, pretty excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, great to have you, and I enjoyed the conversation with you. Participating in masterminds, there's a lot that goes into participating in masterminds. What attracted you to participate in the Leadership Mindset Mastermind? Kind of what brought you to the mastermind?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm always, I tell you what, I'm pretty critical of myself, and, I kind of been sort of feeling stagnant for a little while. And I've had the pleasure of being in conversation with Blaine on several occasions about, life and career and, growth and so on and so forth. And in a conversation I had with him, and more recently, he had mentioned that he was doing the leadership mindset group, and we were just talking about just feeling like you're just not feeling you're using yourself, or you're living your best life, or you're reaching capacity and you're pushing yourself. I kind of think of, I don't know if you've seen the movie Ford versus Ferrari. Great movie, I love it. I'm not a mechanic guy, I'm not a car guy, but there was a part of the movie early on that kind of made me sort of think about myself, and it's kind of weird how that connection happened, but I don't know. The movie goes, Ken Miles is Carroll Shelby's mechanic, and he works on these sports cars. And part of the movie is where a gentleman comes into the shop and is complaining about the car. He has got this nice sports car, and he's saying it is running like garbage. And paraphrasing the part of the movie, Ken Miles is like, well, you're driving a sports car as if you're a school teacher. You just need to drive like you mean it. It's a sports car. Use it as a sports car. Drive it to its capacity. The way it's meant to be driven. And so it just kind of made me think about myself and how I feel. Well, I'm in a lot of leadership opportunities. I experience it on my day-to-day job as a professional, as a father, as a member of my community. And I feel like I am just not reaching my full capacity. I'm not being driven like I should, like I mean it. Drive it like you mean it. So we got to talking about that, and he mentioned Leadership Mindset Group, and so I participated.
I think that's a really, really great explanation, and I appreciate that. And I love the analogy of drive it like a sports car. It's just that level up, right? If you're gonna lead a level up.
Lead a level up.
Lead a level up. So there are, and I know there's a lot of content in the across the time span of the mastermind. Are there any a couple of things that may have come out as a lesson that you may be applying in your life, in your career, something that that leaps to mind?
The Leadership Mindset Group is really rooted around co-creating coordinated movement, and that really is a theme throughout, and it really made sense to me, and it's a principle that I practice on a day-to-day basis. Like I said, I've got a lot of leadership opportunity in what I do, my life, and I always sort of thought of leaders as being like the general that's storming the beach. Come on, everybody, let's go, and just charging forward. And yeah, you've got people behind you that can get enthusiastic about it, and they may, subscribe to what you're saying, or, pass along, some of the, or subscribe and, really accept what you're trying to do. But it's not coordinated, and it's not, you're not co-creating this movement. It is a, follow me, let's, do what I do. And I kind of felt like that's what I was doing in my life, was just trying to, kind of pull people along. And it wasn't until really we wrapped our minds around the co-creating coordinated movement, where you're getting people involved with the idea that let's move together. There's growth in movement. And so that really was the principle throughout the leadership mindset is really around, creating a movement together and growing by changing, or changing by growing. So that's, and there's several different principles. He lays it out in domains, that are applicable across the board. It is about awareness. I'm looking at domains, awareness and context and communication mastery. What really sticks out in my mind is some of the principles around commitment, where it is an understanding of yourself. It's mastering yourself. It's mastering how you feel, what you feel. And it's really a sense of being true to yourself. And when you do that, it gives people an impression. It leaves an aroma. And it's, it influences people. And that's kind of really what I try to do on a regular basis, is just be influential, just be a sense of like, wow, I want to know what that guy's, thinking or doing, or I want to get to know him a little bit more. So I kind of feel that as a leader, we are attracted to those people that, that have that influence. And so that's kind of what I look forward to.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because I do believe, personally, I believe that as well, right? We're attracted to those kinds of individuals that kind of, curious about the things that set them apart, right? It's it's an interesting, and it doesn't happen with everybody that are, that considers themselves leaders. There's lots of different aspects to that. So,
I coached as, sorry to interrupt, but, again, it really comes back to that point of, I don't want to pull people along as a leader. I want to be that bond that creates a movement together, and I find the people that I'm attracted to the most are the people that ask questions of me rather than me ask questions of them,
Yes. Yeah.
I really find those individuals to be more influential than the general that says, let's go take the beach. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very cool. So if you just one more question for you, and because I don't want to keep you too long, but with new people considering joining the mastermind, do you have any ideas or thoughts about any recommendations for people thinking about joining the mastermind? What would you recommend to them as they're coming in and these concepts are being presented to them?
That's a good question, and I have to sort of default back to my experience. Sort of, when I was first joining, I kind of felt like, I don't manage people. I don't, I'm not a supervisor. I don't. I have in the past managed people, but I think if you're ever wondering about your role in a leadership position, again, as a husband or a wife, as a father or a mother, a community member, this is an opportunity to understand how leadership applies in those aspects, not just as a supervisor managing people and or a business owner trying to trying to run a better business. It is something that anybody can take and use. And it really worked for me in that way. I think about how I respond to things, as a parent. You know, I take some of the principles that I learned in this group when I'm talking with my neighbors. So there are principles in there that are you can use across the board in your life, and that's the takeaway is it gives you a lot of skills, it gives you tools, and you can use it all across the board.
That's awesome. And I appreciate that insight, especially for those that are coming into the mastermind or considering coming into the mastermind. I think that's a really, really important perception around. It's not just about leadership. There's lots of dimensions to it. It's personal, career, family, friends, and to be able to have that context to be able to apply to all of those domains is really cool. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't have any other questions for you today. I don't want to keep you too long today, but just I want to tell you thank you for taking time to talk with me, and I really appreciate it. And it's a joy to see you again. So
it's good to see you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks.
Take care.
And thank you for sticking with me through that interview. Dolan, thank you very much for conducting the interview. And Todd, always thank you. I love having you as a son-in-law. I truly do. You're one of the best. And as we kind of move into this, I want to. There's a couple of things that Todd mentioned here that I think is really applicable. Leadership is not role specific. It's not position specific. I'm a leader in my life. Period. He also talked about personal mastery. And for me, that is the single most important piece around anything that I've done in a leadership development capacity over almost 40 years worth of work. It's about how do I master myself? And that's where that mindset comes into play. Energy will follow attention. And I want to notice what I'm noticing. I want to keep coming back to that. What am I noticing? What's that mindset? The mindset will either work with me and for me, or it will inhibit and hinder me. And I want to be real clear about what's going on there. What's the story that is in place? I'm always going to have it. It's always going to be there. But do I want to be held captive by it, or do I want to actually build a story that works for me? Because I can build a story that works for me and be authentic in the same dynamic. I can authentically build an authentic story so that who I am comes through. Tomorrow we're going to be looking at commitment. And that's an area that I have, from time immemorial it seems, spending time looking at commitment. What is commitment? I'm committed to that. Yeah. When I was working in Japan, are you committed? Yes, I'm committed. They actually have a word for it. Honki desu. Yeah, I'm committed. Yes. I'm very committed. I think we've got it wired wrong. I truly do. People spend a lot of time being committed to doing things, being committed to a diet, being committed to making money, being committed to a job, being committed to a relationship. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It just plain doesn't work. Too much energy spent on the wrong thing. Going all the way back to the beginning. We are committed to developing leaders. We're going to spend $42 billion a year doing it. We're committed to you learning how to lead more effectively in this way. The needle on employee engagement hasn't moved. We're not paying attention to the right thing. And it's mindset. Mindset. How do you move a mindset? We're going to talk tomorrow about the nature of commitment. What is true commitment, and how do you want to position it so that you end up moving that future possibility into a present experience? And I say the future possibility, it already exists. It's just not manifested. It already is there. I just haven't arrived. So how do I use commitment to make that shift? And it's a phase shift. I want to jump from where I am to another place. And I don't necessarily want to go through a whole lot of machinations to make it happen. I don't have to have a linear cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect. If I can just shift this mindset structure in a way that resonates with that new reality, I will experience it. I truly will. That's the way it works. That's the law of the universe. So we will be picking up tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, here on the west coast of the United States. And wherever you find yourself in the world, I look forward to having you join us. Check your email. You'll be getting an email shortly after the conclusion of this session today. There's a link to the video replay, so you'll be able to get that, as well as a new PDF that is focused on what is called the Spirit of Opulence. The Spirit of Opulence by one of my favorite philosophers, Thomas Troward. So we'll talk a little bit about the Spirit of Opulence tomorrow in the context of commitment. So again, thank you for listening. This is Blaine Bartlett, and I'll see you tomorrow.